Afternoon. This is Lori. I'm on the board of Gardens Buffalo Niagara, and welcome here to our first Garden Pro interview. First, let me tell you a little bit about Gardens Buffalo Niagara. Gardens Buffalo Niagara was formed after many years of real success with Garden Walk Buffalo, and we brought in first National Garden Festival. It was the first formation of, or the first iteration of Gardens Buffalo Niagara. And what we do now is we organize a series of events. We have Garden Walk Buffalo, of course, the new East Side Garden Walk, Open Gardens, now in their 10th year, the Garden Art Sale. We promote local garden walks from all over the region. And we now run 2 beautification grant programs. So we're really proud of both of those. This year, because of the pandemic, we are have just reformed, all of us, and what we are now is Buffalo Garden Views, and we have events every day for the month of July for this whole, for this summer. So here we are with our first interviewee, Sally Jean Cunningham, for our first Garden Pro interview. Sally is a certified nursery and landscape professional and author of Buffalo Style Gardens, a celebration of Buffalo's unique gardening culture that is boosting local tourism and changing Buffalo's Rust Belt image for the better. She also wrote Great Garden Companions, focusing on beneficial insects, and has inspired and educated gardeners throughout the U.S. as a Buffalo News columnist, monthly contributor to Buffalo Spree magazine, and a TV garden advisor, and has been doing that for 23 years on WIVB Channel 4. Formerly, Sally was a master gardener with the Cornell Cooperative Extension and an educator there, and a garden center consultant. She writes and lectures about habitat protection, biodiversity, and how to include native plants in home landscapes. Welcome, Sally.
Hello. Happy to be with you. Proud to talk about this topic. When you talk about Gardens Buffalo Niagara, I feel like a grandma who was there at the beginning, and we're proud of such an adventure it's been.
And we have benefited a lot from this adventure. So thank you for all your huge role in that. Mm-hmm. So I am going to pull up a series of pictures that you shared, and here they are. So here we have one. So we've talked a little bit about pollinating gardens. Well, you and I have talked about this times before, but a lot of people plant for pollinators. Maybe we can start there.
Yes, I think that people want lots of flowers in their garden, and they think it's a pollinator garden, and it's certainly a good start. But certain plants have greater importance, and certain insects have become the popular one. If we could spend a little more time back at our monarch butterfly, she became the poster child for insects that people realize are in trouble, that habitat has been disappearing, that there's fragmentation all around the country of what little habitat remains, and people have grasped that we have to help the monarch by planting certain plants. And that's a great concept, but it really is only limited in that, yes, we know the monarch requires milkweed, Asclepias species, and people are doing that. Thanks to the Eastern Monarch Butterfly Organization in Western New York, Dave O'Donnell has done so much to popularize and make the information known about the monarch butterfly and the need for the milkweed plants. But it's kind of the canary in the coal mine. It's kind of the warning signal, and there's so much more than just the caterpillar need. Before we leave that, I will comment that it's much more than the flowers and the pollen and the nectar that these beautiful butterflies get. It's that butterflies came from caterpillars, And caterpillars need to put holes in leaves and eat certain plants. So the new concept comes in, and we'll get to lots more about that, about how we have to plant certain food plants for caterpillars, larval food plants. Now, I want to show you, let's go to that barn picture in the Zittel Farm in Eden, New York. A wonderful local artist wrote on the side of this barn, "When we go, we're taking you all with us." And that's the truth. If we did not have insects on the earth, humans would be gone soon. We rely on insects, pollinators alone, for most of the food we put in our mouths, tracing it backward. And insects also are our soil builders. They are the management of things we would consider pest insects. So for everything that lives or flies or crawls, there's a predator. And insects are often the predator of their cousins. So on that particular barn, we're seeing Hymenoptera. Bees and wasps and hornets and ants are all the Hymenoptera insects that have 4 wings. And they're absolutely crucial, even if we don't like them at the family picnic. But they're absolutely essential as pollinators and for many other functions. E.O. Wilson was one of the world's most renowned biologists or ecologists, and he wrote, "If humans were to disappear from the face of the earth, it would all go back to a pretty good balance. If insects went, it's over." So remember, we have to get over our entomophobic culture and start to appreciate the insects and then think about what they need. Now, I talked a minute about a caterpillar, and people go, "Ew, caterpillars are grubby." But caterpillars are, first of all, what birds need. Do we like our baby birds? We certainly do. And a lot of this concept I'm going to be quoting, and many of you know, but we want to get this out to the people who don't know, has come from recent writing by a wonderful entomologist called Dr. Tallamy, Doug Tallamy. I'm going to hold this book up in front of my face, Bringing Nature Home by Dr. Tallamy. And he recently wrote another book called Nature's Best Hope.
Yeah.
And in both of these books, while people have written for decades, a century, about the importance of native plants and naturalized landscapes, Dr. Tallamy made it clear it's all about the insects, that native birds, native insects upon which we depend, have to have native plants. And he really brought it home solidly. And that's a lot of the statistics and things that I will be talking about. But back to the caterpillars, we need the caterpillars, especially at this time of year, because baby birds can't eat birdseed and beetles with hard shells. They have to have soft, squishy things called caterpillars. And one little clutch of chickadees that are raised over about 3 weeks, those parents have to bring back 3,000 caterpillars of some form to that clutch to raise a healthy family. So that's a heck of a lot of caterpillars. And where are they found? In the native plants, specifically, mostly native trees. So that's key concept number 1. So let's look at a field. Let's see a field of native plants. What do you think, Lori? What do people think about all these?
I think that people would say that's a lot of weeds to have in my city garden.
That sure is a lot of weeds, even in my country. Now, this happens to be a view of my country place, a path I've mowed through a field that is now mostly goldenrod come August. Right now, it's other things. But I want to talk first about what are weeds, but to start with saying, our ideas today are for city, suburban, and rural gardeners the same. The concepts apply. You're not going to have 10 acres of goldenrods. But many of you, and I know you do, Lori, and many of our Garden Walk Buffalo gardens have enormous plantings that are partly native plants. Now, 93% of what people garden with are non-native, but If we start to aim for higher, if we start to aim for 25% or 50% natives in our yards, we're doing a lot to replace habitat, and we'll get to that. But let's
Oh no.
back to that goldenrod. Achoo! Do you think that's what made me sneeze? Lori and I know it is not what made us sneeze. People blame goldenrod for hay fever. Let's get over that one. Tell everyone you know. It's ragweed, a very innocuous looking plant with 1,000,000 seeds per plant, or lots of seeds per plant. And it's not the goldenrod, which happens to be flowering at the same time. So it's unfair evidence. It's a misnomer. So onward from weeds.
Right.
One
And
of the
I've
problems, I think, in what people choose for native plants is that weed is just a word. If we talk about milkweed, butterfly weed, ironweed, those sound awful because they have the word weed attached, but they happen to be highly desirable native plants. So first of all, let's get over the word weed. And this little presentation times perfectly. I just wrote for the Buffalo News in this week, if you're looking at this on the week of July 10th or 12th, in the Buffalo News issue, it will be, what is a weed? And all the gardeners want, as many people asked me to identify the difference between a weed and an invasive plant, an aggressive plant, a spreading plant, a ground cover. Everything's not a weed just because it spreads well. If it spreads well, it's up to us gardeners to put it in the right place where it's okay to spread, so we don't set up our own fight in a garden forever. And it's not right to call, say, black-eyed Susans invasive. Okay, they're a little enthusiastic perhaps, and maybe you get too many at one time sometimes, but put them where it's okay to have a border of black-eyed Susans. And their invasive should be saved for the second biggest problem we have in our country in terms of ecology. The first biggest is what we might call urban sprawl, or overrunning habitat. Right now we have farmed or tilled half of the earth with leaving nothing natural behind. And then most of the rest of it, we have burned, logged, leveled, flooded. We have destroyed most of what was once there. And so habitat destruction for human uses is number one problem when we get to all these species survival. But the second is invasive plants. And that's where we should use the word invasive. Non-native plants that come in and they cause great economic damage and great ecological harm because they displace everything else. They come in with no natural enemies, no bird eats that one, no insect eats that one, and they can run rampant over all the habitat that our birds and insects and amphibians require. So first is the habitat destruction, second is invasive plants taking over the world, leaving us with very little nature left. And that's where we get to the city folks and the suburban folks, where Dr. Talamy and Gardens Buffalo Niagara people want us all to know that it's up to us. We have to provide the habitat by providing native plants, and not just native plants, but certain ones are more valuable. You can get a lot more information all over the place, but we'll show you in a little bit the Native Plants Collaborative sign and website. We want you to know there's a Native Plants Collaborative. And along with Gardens Buffalo Niagara and Plant Western New York, they've made a plan to put this sign all over Buffalo's gardens for the Great Garden Walk that didn't happen the same this year. So you will see this sign, Native Plants Grow Here, displayed proudly in front of many Buffalo gardens that you can tour with a front yard tour. If you go to Gardens Buffalo Niagara website, they'll tell you how to get around a front yard touring, but it'll also just jump up at you when you're driving around. And eventually we'll have tours and bus groups coming again, and big garden walks with 90,000 people coming to Buffalo on one weekend. We hope to see all that again. But in the meantime, watch for this sign. And if you have native plants in your garden, we'd like very much for the people who would have been on a garden walk to pick one up at Urban Roots in Buffalo. We'd like you to have these signs. If you want to say you believe in native plants, you grow some in your yard and garden. So that's a very important concept. And as Dr. Talamy and all of us who are naturalists and ecologists and ecology oriented want to do, is we want to get the flowers out front. That was a big thing that Buffalo in Bloom started it, and then Garden Walk Buffalo picked up and hugely multiplied the power of what you see out front in gardens. There are flowers all over front yards in Buffalo and in some other cities around the country, but also vegetable gardens. And it's really important to say less lawn, more flowers, more plantings, and then it's also important how we use and plant them. So I hope the main message is, gardeners, let's get those plants out there, out front, in our backyards, and more of them native. Now I'll show you a couple more native plants. We didn't do a whole PowerPoint presentation here, and I and others have those. If you go to the Native Plants Collaborative, you can find talks by many of us about what are the native plants and how can you use them. That one happens to be a view from my garden when the Philipendula, a queen of the prairie, was blooming, and that's my barn in the background. But this is a beautiful plant, and I've seen Western New York landscapers use it also. It would be maybe a 4.5-foot plant at the back of a flower border, but believe me, when those pink plumes are flowering, you have a dance of butterflies and bees, all kinds of them all over it, many, many species you could count at the same time. And I hope we can develop, in fact, more enthusiasm for insects. And maybe the way people keep bird books, we should be keeping insect books and note what we've observed. And the more you look, the more you realize it's complicated. There are many more than we know, even if you really get into it. And it humbles you in terms of saying, what's going on? What don't I know? Maybe I shouldn't kill that unless we shouldn't be killing things if we don't have some immediate damage occurring to us. So the native plants give us a lesson in that.
Right.
I
I didn't
think
mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Laura. You have a lot of thoughts, a lot of good.
Well, you did write this book with Jim, the Buffalo Style Garden, and I wanted to ask you again. Because there are a lot of city and suburban gardeners tuning in to watch us today. And we think of native gardens as kind of messy maybe, or something that our neighbors wouldn't necessarily approve of. And I know you've written before about, how to use or how to present the garden so that it is more acceptable, or you have a means of talking to your neighbors.
Absolutely. I appreciate that's the question, because we know in our city and other cities, there have been lawsuits and people trying to take down their neighbor's garden. And so I have a yellow jacket around my face right now. We have a lot of incidents of people complaining because somebody put out a field in the front yard. Well, okay, there's two responsibilities there. One is that we hope everybody learns that a flat green grass lawn is not positive for nature. We understand if you're having a picnic on it or you're using it for croquet or the kids or whatever. But if you don't need that lawn, it's the least valuable, unvaluable for anything natural.
Right.
So you want the flowers. So then for the person who wants a native plant garden though, or we used to have a big movement about meadow gardens, a lot of meadow gardens turn people off because they look messy to the common eye. The eye who wants to see clean
Right.
green and meatball shaped shrubs and everything super tidy, which our normal fields and forests are not. But the person who wants to do native planting or any flower garden planting out front, we can make better edges. We can make the edges look tidy or a path around it, or big blocks of one kind of plant like bee balm that at some moment looks great, or that filipendula I showed you, or goldenrod. There are goldenrod cultivars that aren't messy at all, or even a species of Joe Pye weed.
Mhm.
There's many, many plants that you can put in large groups, layered. One of the best things we can do for nature in general, and it can be very attractive in a front yard, is a layered island in the middle of the yard with maybe a mowed green path around it, the lawn surrounding it, or a great big front around the house that's layered plantings. And by layered, I mean trees, shrubs, perennials, grasses, ground covers, things that grow well together. And in nature, layering is the norm. And in nature, there's no such thing as a weed because out there they've figured out what works. Here, when we leave bare soil, we set ourselves up for the aggressive weeds, the not nice things to come in. So altogether, yes, in our city yards, we can do many native plants, and many are stunning, beautiful plants. We just have to learn how to use them. And we also have to figure out where to buy them and where to grow them. The Western New York Land Conservancy, the many other organizations are making an effort through the Native Plant Collaborative to get more growers to grow native plants. But then I'll get to the final real concept. It's in our minds. We kind of have to change the paradigm in terms of what's important. Humans have been raised to go garden shopping and say, oh, a pretty red flower, look that big, I have to have that. And they'll buy that perennial at the moment it's peaked, and it's going to look like that for 2 weeks and maybe come back next year, as opposed to knowing your site, saying what does this site allow for, and then choose plants that have usefulness. We call them ecosystem services, plants that give something back, berries, leaves that caterpillar needs. A spice bush swallowtail butterfly has to have spice bush somewhere so it can chew up those leaves. And then again, our concept is, oh, there's holes in the leaves. What should I spray? Oh my goodness. We have to, again, change our idea and say, some holes in the leaves mean you're doing your job. So we really do have to think about plants differently, not just how pretty they are for 2.5 weeks, but what are they doing for Mother Nature? And there is a way with some knowledge of layering, grouping, bordering. We can make a native plant garden or a partly native plant garden look just absolutely awesome. Now, that book that Jim and I wrote called Buffalo Style Gardens features the wow of Buffalo Gardens, the art and funky and creativity, and includes lots of our suburban gardens out here that also do equally interesting things. But it also gets into some of the solid horticulture and basic concepts like you do need to do some homework. You do need to learn your plants, but I hope collaboratively we're all working in that direction. And Gardens Buffalo Niagara is certainly a huge force now with so many interest groups pulling together. And Lori, a lot of credit goes to you for bringing to the forefront in Gardens Buffalo Niagara a lot of the thinking about the pollinators, about native plants. And we start with the pollinators, and it gets us into all the other creatures, the frogs and the toads and everything else that benefits if we have a semi-natural garden.
Right. We have a lot of gardens. We are a gardening region. And
Yeah.
all of these gardens do more, that they're beautiful and they're great for us and they bring people together, but they all also serve as habitat for
Oh, yeah. And if I could, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I kind of want to wrap up something with a concept that we've mentioned less lawn. We've mentioned more flowers out front and diversity. And flowers should be offered for all the pollinators from spring through fall. That even means a dandelion might be tolerable. It may not sell everywhere, but okay. But it's the first thing that lady beetles, which we call ladybugs, but they're a beetle. Lady beetles and honeybees often are the first ones out there. And even more important, perhaps, than the honeybees are the native bees. So there's a lot of reasons we need all of the flowers. Then we have to have layered, clustered plantings. That's an important concept. We have to have no pesticides. If you want to have a butterfly garden, like forget it if your neighbor's having lawn company come and spray every month. It just doesn't work. The pesticide drift is lethal first to butterflies, and obviously there's harm in use of many of those products for all of us, and certainly for our pets and other animals. But we also have to provide water. I don't think we provided a picture here of a water garden, but boy, Buffalo gardens have water. Our suburban people have a farm pond or little water gardens, and the beneficial insects even need water. So having a bird bath or a bubbler, and shallow, so the insect can climb out on a rock and not drown after getting a bath. So we need to help the insects and help the birds, all of those ways. And diversity really counts. Diversity is a great deal of what we're up to in Buffalo. I'm proud of the efforts we've made. I appreciate Visit Buffalo Niagara for the marketing they've done to bring us to the world's attention. And then, of course, most of all, for the gardeners and all they're doing. But as we learn, we have figured out that some plants are more important than others. So I thank you for this time. What else do we want to talk about? Do we have other thoughts, Laurie?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I really appreciate all of the time you've spent with us. And I'm sure folks could find you through one of your many your many publications or avenues if they wanted to. And you just have a lot of speaking engagements in an ordinary year.
Yeah, we hope we'll all be out speaking again. It's been a little. I usually take people on garden-themed trips with AAA to teach stuff as we go. I also want to show you Buffalo Spree magazine. I think it is this month. It just arrived in my mailbox today. There's an article about native plants, Dr. Talamy, bringing nature home. And I hope you get to look at that. I'm particularly concerned that we get this messaging outward. So, gee, thank you, everybody. And watch for more of these. Gardens Buffalo Niagara is doing a lot to get the education home.
Right. And we should also add that the article in Buffalo Spree is about Dr. Talamy's presentation that he was invited to give through the Western New York Land Conservancy.
That's right. I really wrote this because we had almost 1,000 people on that Zoom program for his talk. But what about the people who wouldn't Zoom in on it, who wouldn't read, won't even read the book? I want to get to all those other people. So it's up to you, every single one of you, to do that. But thank you for bringing that up. I tried to reiterate the messaging in that particular Zoom talk. We're all multipliers as we learn, and I'm still learning every single day. I see some tools behind me and a few non-native cannas, but keep gardening, everybody, and stay healthy.
Thanks so much. And that Zoom webinar is actually, I think, available on the internet. So if folks wanted to go and see that, they could absolutely do that. So thank you so much, Sally. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.